Hey, this is Pastor. Welcome back to our series entitled Building a Great Life. Over the last couple of sessions, we've looked at building our faith, which is very important as we trust God. And Jesus commanded us to have faith in God, and we looked at that a couple of sessions ago. The last session, we talked about how to prepare for a miracle and just acknowledge the reality that from time to time we need miracles in our life. We come to the end of our own energy, our own effort, our own self, and we really need God to step in. And so we looked at some principles on preparing for God to do a miracle in your life. Today I want to talk to you about the next aspect of building a great life with God, which is building a great life through godly commitments. Through godly commitments. That word commitment, if you look in the dictionary, it simply says a pledge or a promise for obligation or engagement. But then the last word says involvement. In other words, if I'm going to make a commitment, it requires a decision, it requires a choice, and it requires action. It requires a decision, choice, and action. That's what a commitment is. And we go through life making lots of commitments. Sometimes we are way too committed to the wrong things, and that doesn't leave us enough time or energy or resources to be committed to the right things. And so today I want to talk to you, just kind of give you some ideas from Scripture on building a great life through godly commitments. Probably the best passage on commitments is found in Matthew chapter 16, verse 24 to 27, where Jesus gives them a challenge. He says, listen, if you're going to follow me, you must make a commitment. You have to take up your cross, deny yourself, and follow me. Now, when we look at that passage, we see Jesus telling us something very clear. He says, our commitments have power. Our commitments have power to shape our values, shape our lives, and really shape our destiny. But let's look at that first idea from Matthew chapter 16, verse 24. It's that our commitments have power, to listen to this, to show my values. They show my values. They shape my values. They show what is important to me. Here's what Jesus said in verse 24. Jesus said to his disciples, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves, take up their cross, and follow me. Jesus said, if you're going to be committed to me, you must value me. And if you value me, you must take action and you must make a decision. And in doing so, he says, how do you do that? He says, if you want to be my disciple, you have to deny yourself. Now, we also live in a world that here in America, people love to keep their options open. They love to make shallow commitments or superficial commitments, not make deep commitments. Why? Because they really just want to be committed to themselves. And I want you to know you can't be a real strong or a true follower of Christ and be committed only to yourself. Notice Jesus uses those words. You must deny yourself. If you're going to follow Christ in a deep and a strong way, you have to deny yourself. You can't always be looking out for you and your needs. You have to look, first of all, to Jesus and then also look to the needs of others. That's what he says over and over. So our commitments, they shape what I value. They show what I value. And Jesus said, if you love me, you will deny yourself and love him so much that you will follow him. And as a result, we'll be able to change the world. The second thing that Jesus says right in verse 25 is this. He says, our commitments have the power to shape our lives. What we are committed to will ultimately shape our lives. He says that right there in verse 25. He says, whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will ultimately find it. Man, the truth is, if we really want to find what real life is about, we have to follow Christ. He's going to tell us our purpose. He's going to give us direction. He's going to give us meaning in life here on this earth in the here and now. Why? So we can ultimately please God and fulfill his purpose. And when we please God, then we get to see God's blessings in our lives. Too many, I believe, of us make the wrong commitments, and certainly too many of the wrong commitments, and that keeps us from following Christ. The reality of it is, if I go out today and I make a commitment to the car dealer and a commitment to the mortgage company, and I make a commitment to the boat dealer and I make a commitment to this and I make a commitment to that, don't be shocked when I don't have enough time and energy left over to make commitments that should shape my life for the good. The reality, all of our commitments have consequences. Some have good consequences, some have bad. If I make a good decision and a good commitment, chances are the results are going to be positive. If I make a bad decision and commit my family and my kids to something that draw me away from faith and away from church and away from God, I shouldn't be shocked if the consequences of those decisions ultimately end up being negative. And so Jesus says in verse 25, He says, listen, your commitments, they have the power to shape your life and also shape our families. And here's the third thing Jesus said. He says, your commitments have the power to shape your destiny, to determine your destiny. He says that right there in verse 26 and 27. He says, what good will it be for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their own soul? He says, man, if you work hard all your life to gain the world, to gain this, to gain that, but you forfeit your own soul, he says, you've determined your destiny, but you found out you were deciding and making decisions and commitments based on the wrong thing. But then he follows it with the next verse. Notice what he says. But the Son of Man is going to come in His Father's glory someday with His angels. Then notice these words. He says, and then He will reward each person according to what they have done. Did you get that? He will reward us according to what we've done. In other words, if we've served Him and honored Him and followed Him, the consequence or the result of that is that He's going to come and reward us. So the beauty of making commitments to Christ, making commitments for faith that matter, is that we can be assured that there is coming a day when Jesus will reward us for everything we've done. For every service I've done, every opportunity I've had to share my faith, to show godly kindness and godly grace to someone else, I know that I'll be rewarded for that someday. Now, let me give you a couple of ideas, some practical ideas on making commitments, because the reality of it is we live in a world where every day we have the opportunity to make commitments. I'm constantly getting emails about a ministry opportunity our church could get involved in, that we could go on, or I bet once or twice a week I get some contact with a mission organization that there's a great need somewhere. And the reality of it is, as a pastor, I could commit our church to all of those things, and you know what? We would be totally ineffective. We would be totally ineffective in what we do. So I have to use a process to determine how we make decisions. And so let me give you 3 practical ideas on making good, godly commitments. Here's thought number 1. You ready? If you want to make sure that you're ready when you are faced with a decision every day to make a commitment, here's thought number 1. Give God your first thought of each day. Give God your first thought of each day. We find that right in Psalm 5, verse 3. Here's what it says. In the morning, Lord, you hear my voice. In the morning, I lay my request before you and wait expectantly. Now, what is he saying? The psalmist is saying, when I wake up in the morning, I'm going to talk to God. When I wake up in the morning, I'm going to talk to God. I'm going to have a conversation with God. I want to please you. I want to honor you. God, lead me. Now, if I have a conversation with God, the one who ultimately matters most and should matter most in my life, and then I begin my day with the idea that I want to please God, it'll be easier for us to make godly commitments. It'll also be easier for us to say no to commitments that are not so godly. So thought number 1, if you want to make good, God-honoring commitments each and every day, and sometimes the best commitments you can make is to say no, and no is a good word from time to time, but first of all, it starts with having a conversation with God. Let Him have the first thought of every day. Here's the second thought, and it's right out of Scripture. Give God the first day of every week. Give God the first day of every week. In Acts chapter 20, verse 7, it says, on the first day of every week, each week, the disciples came together to break bread together. Now, let me go ahead and read the latter part of verse 7. This one applies to me. He says, and Paul spoke, or Paul preached that day all the way until midnight. Now, I get accused from time to time, of preaching rather long, but I take great comfort. As best I can tell, in my entire ministry, I've never preached until midnight, unless it might have been a midnight service or a candlelight service. But other than that, it says what? That on the first day of the week, Those first disciples, those followers of Jesus that were denying themselves, spent the first day of every week with God, worshiping with the other brothers and sisters in the Lord. And so if you want to make good and godly commitments, thought number one, God gets the first conversation of the day. Thought number two, God gets the first day of every week. And here's thought number three. When you are making a decision, give God the first consideration in that decision. Say, God, is this a decision that I can make and still honor you, and still follow you, and still live up to what you want me to do? This is where Solomon said in Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5 and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart, lean not to your own understanding, in all your ways acknowledge Him, and He will make your paths straight. I love those words. He will make your paths straight. So the truth is that even sometimes when we do our best to make good decisions, they turn out not to have been a good decision. I'd raise my hand right now. We're all there. But here's what we know. If I've given God the first thought of every day, and if I give God the first day of every week, and I trust God and have given Him first consideration in whatever decision I make, here's what I know. We are going to be able to trust God, that even if something turns out to be not so well desired, that God can make that path straight and He can bless us in spite of it. Now, those are three practical ways of making decisions. Don't be shocked. There are some pitfalls that if you make a good decision, that you might become distracted or discouraged someday. It happened to Peter. Remember when Peter walked on the water? He said, Lord, if it be your will, command me to walk on the water. And it says Peter got out of the boat and walked on the water. What happened? We all know he sank. But do you remember why he sank? It says because he got distracted. He saw the wind and the waves and took his eyes off Jesus. So my encouragement to you, if you're going to build a great life, you've got to build a great life through godly commitments. And the best way to do that is to, after you've made a commitment that honors God, keep your eyes fixed on Jesus. God bless.